about Isaac, even though we are in Parshat Toldot, which really is associated with the story of Jacob and Esau, there is a point that I want to elaborate on and to talk about that is also going to be, I think, the subject in a slightly different form of the sermon this Shabbat, because it is something that the more I investigated it, I thought the more powerful and important I believe that it actually is. So let's start with this. Isaac is in some ways the least consequential, in some ways, of the Avot, of the forefathers being Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph is not considered one of the forefathers, for F-O-R-E, obviously, not for F-O-U-R, not forefathers, but fathers who came before. He's not one of the Avot, one of the fathers that we mention in the Amidah, in the central prayer, when we say Elokei Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And Joseph is part of a sort of different constellation in the Jewish tradition. He's one of Jacob's sons, therefore the tribes of Israel come from his two children, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph does not constitute his own tribe. In any case, when we talk about the forefathers, we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham has many significant stories associated with him, and obviously is the founder of the people Israel. Jacob also has a long, elaborated story and involves the dream that he has in Toldot of the ladder, stealing the birthright, marrying Rachel and Leah, losing his child Joseph, being the father of the tribes, changing his name to Israel, giving his name to the people. You don't have that with Isaac. Isaac is, as I have mentioned before, is more acted upon than acting. Isaac has two major events in his life. One is the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, where Isaac is taken up to the mountain to be killed. The other is the deception of Yaakov, where Jacob pretends to be Esau and steals his brother's birthright. But Isaac himself doesn't do very much. And modern scholarship, if you want to go that route, has sometimes speculated that maybe there were Isaac stories in the cycle that never were written down or got lost. Who knows? It is possible. Certainly in the long life that Isaac lived, more things happened to him than we know about. But I want to talk today about Isaac's contribution, what Isaac did do. Because I think if we look at three distinctive things in Isaac's life, actually Isaac's contribution philosophically is an extremely significant one, not only for our lives, but for the Jewish tradition. And so I'm going to ask you, if you have a Bible with you, to turn to chapter 26. You'll see, by the way, in this chapter that Isaac does the same thing, the wife-sister motif that Abraham has done twice, saying that Rebekah is in fact his sister, not his wife, because he's afraid that they will kill her, but in fact, she survives, they survive, and we will leave that motif aside for the moment, although it's a very interesting question about it. And instead, let's just go to verse 12. It says, Isaac sowed that land and reaped 100-fold the same year. The Lord blessed him and grew richer and richer until he was very wealthy. So Isaac is doing well. He acquired flocks and herds in a large household, so the Philistines envied him. So the wealthy evoke envy, In ancient times, in modern times, Isaac is wealthy, he is envied. The Philistines stopped up the wells which his servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham, filling them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, because you become far too big for us." So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the Vadi Gerar, where he settled. So the Philistines, in an act of spiteful foolishness, stop up wells. Wells, remember, are a benefit to almost everyone, but they want to chase Isaac away. Now, we know that Isaac has done well, that he's grown flocks and herds, that he has, in the manner of his father, and maybe more commonly in the ancient Near East than we thought, pretended that his wife is in fact his sister. But so far, we don't know what Isaac does. That is, how does he spend his time? What characterizes him? What makes him different from Abraham, from Jacob? But the next verse tells us. The next verse says, Isaac dug anew the wells which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. Now, that's very interesting, because the idea that he spends his time digging the wells that his father dug tells us already, possibly, something about Isaac's character. He doesn't dig new wells. He redigs the wells that have already been dug. That's very interesting, right? What does that tell us about Isaac? Well, let's hold that for one moment while we examine two other factors about Isaac that I think are important. One is, you will remember that Isaac does not choose his own wife. Rather, Abraham sends his servant Eliezer, and Eliezer goes and finds Rebekah. When Rebekah comes back and becomes Isaac's wife, this is now in last week's portion. Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Beer Lachai Roi, which, as we spoke about in the sermon last week, is a distant place where Isaac is meditating lasuach basadeh, a hapex legamina, a word that appears only once, lasuach, in the Torah, and is often thought of as praying or meditating. So Isaac is this wanderer alone. He spends a lot of time alone. He's meditative, he's calm, he's solitary, and he falls in love with Rebekah. The first mention of love for a husband, for a wife. In fact, what it says specifically is, and I want to read you this, Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah and took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her, once again, the first mention of love of a husband for a wife in the Torah, and thus found comfort after his mother's death, which is also interesting. That means that Sarah's death was very difficult for Isaac. We would not otherwise have known it. We might have assumed it, but wouldn't know it. And that Rebekah and Rebekah's presence in Isaac's life comforts him. So we now know something about his emotional disposition towards Rebekah, and we know something about the fact that he spends his time digging wells. There is one more aspect of Isaac's life that I want to get to, but first, I want to re-emphasize that the reason we're spending all this time on exploring Isaac's life is that, unlike other characters in the lineage, including, by the way, Joseph, Isaac is fairly quiescent. He is not an active mover and shaker in the biblical world. And so we have to search a little bit more deeply. We have to dig, as he did for the wells, to find out what it is that characterizes Isaac that makes him different. It is interesting to note, rather, that his name which derives, of course, from, first of all, it means laughter, and derives, of course, from the incident in which Sarah laughs because she thinks, how can she have a baby at her advanced age? She thinks it's funny. His name, Laughter, is also an unusual attribution for a character. I don't know of any major figure in any religious literature, apart from Isaac, who is named Laughter. And that also lends a certain cast to his life, even though his life is not such, one would think, as would evoke laughter. Neither the Akedah, neither the binding of Isaac, nor his old frailty and the fact that his son deceives him, you would think would be a cause of laughter. But laughter generally connotes some sort, unless it's cruel laughter or savage laughter, connotes some sort of perspective on the realities of life, some ability to take them with a measure of acceptance. And Samuel Johnson said that mirth was a test of one's character. Do you have it in you to be able to laugh? Maybe at yourself, certainly at yourself. I think that people who don't laugh at themselves will soon find that others will do it for them. So at yourself, certainly, but also at some of the foibles and comedies that surround us every single day in our world. In any case, this is Isaac's character as we know it. He's capable of love. He seems to be capable of intimacy and closeness, even though his wife fooling him at the end of his life is certainly a challenge to that characterization. And Isaac is somebody who favors renewal over innovation. He redigs the wells that his father digs. So the third characteristic of Isaac, which you may or may not be aware of, is he is the only one of the Avot who never leaves the land of Israel. Abraham, remember, when there's a famine, goes to Egypt. And Abraham, of course, starts his life outside the land of Israel in Ur Kasdim. Jacob, of course, leaves Israel. Among other things, he goes to Egypt at the end of his life to meet his son Joseph. But Isaac never does. Isaac stays in the land. Now, there are some personalities who find that the way that they invigorate themselves is by changing their setting. There's a Hebrew saying like that, Mishanem makom, mishanem mazal. Change your place, change your luck. However, Isaac doesn't do that. Isaac stays in Israel. And I want you to consider with me together those three facts. Let's put a little bit of a place on this, a sharpness on this. First of all, Isaac redigs the wells that his father has dug. Second, Isaac is the only one of the Avot, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to live his life with one woman. Abraham, remember, has a child with Hagar. Jacob has Leah and Rachel, and Bilhah and Zilpah, for that matter. Not Isaac. Isaac loves Rebekah and stays with Rebekah his whole life. We don't hear about a concubine. We don't hear about a second wife. Only Rebekah. Not only that, but Rebekah is a consolation for Sarah, whom Isaac also was attached to. So he moved from his mother to his wife. He redigs the wells that his father Abraham has dug, and he never leaves the land of Israel. When we put all this together, what does it teach us about Isaac? I think that what we are learning here is that Isaac is somebody who is capable of renewal as opposed to surprise and innovation. He doesn't have to go somewhere else because he's nourished by the place he's already in day after day and year after year. He doesn't have to find another partner because he can find ever new depths in the partner that he has chosen. He doesn't have to dig new wells because he can redig the wells that his father has dug. And that reality is incredibly important in life and in the Jewish tradition. We are coming up on the holiday of Hanukkah. Now, Hanukkah is maybe, along with Passover, the most observed, most beloved holiday among Jews, whether they're religious or not religious, especially if not. What does Hanukkah celebrate? It, strangely enough, if you ask most people, they will have no idea when the temple, the first or the second temple, were dedicated. But everyone knows when the temple was rededicated, because Hanukkah is rededication. And that reality, that it is rededication, that it is renewal, that it is Isaac, that in some ways determines the meaning of one's life. That idea is both important, I think, and powerful, and has something to do with why we read the Torah over and over and over again. Because if the Torah wasn't capable of nourishing us over and over and over again, we would be just skipping on to other books. But that's not what Isaac represents. He not only represents the chain of continuity between Abraham and Jacob, but the possibility of renewal, the possibility, and even the theme of the blessing that he gives. A blessing, after all, is a renewal of here is something I have that I give you so that you can carry it on. And that idea from Isaac is really powerful, and you can add in some ways, Jennifer wrote about that laughter is a reaction, so maybe that's part of Isaac's reactive character. You could fit laughter into this paradigm, I suppose. It is certainly possible, and might also be thought of as one of the ways that we renew ourselves, right? When we laugh at something, it certainly feels invigorating and renewing. But in all these different ways, you see that what Isaac wants in the world, even in his pact with Avimelech, what he wants is for things to be restored, renewed. It's what Rav Kook, the great rabbi of Israel before it became a state, said that his lifelong task was. It was to sanctify the old, to renew the old and to sanctify the new. To renew the old is Isaac's task here. And that's part of, we've been having a scholar in residence weekend. It's not actually a weekend. The last session is tonight. You can watch the other two sessions on YouTube with Dahlia Lithwick, who is a scholar of the Supreme Court and reports on it. And it is clear that the mission of a court, especially Supreme Court, since they deal with constitutional issues, is to renew the old. And there may be different philosophies on how to do that, right? Some may want to do it by adhering more closely to what they understand to be the literal meaning of the text. Some may want to do it by being more freely interpretive. But whatever philosophy you adhere to, the idea remains the same, which is to take this ancient foundational document and not to make a new one, but rather to renew it so that it retains its relevance and power in a different world. And that clearly is the task of interpreting Torah, right? You turn to the Torah again and again and again, and each time you get a different result. And you get a different result in part because you're different, but also because it's inexhaustibly renewable. I remember when my father, when I was 10 years old, my father moved from Harrisburg to Philadelphia to take a different pulpit. And I remember saying to him at that time or a little bit after, this is a really good idea, Dad, because now you can just give the same sermons that you gave in Harrisburg all those years. And he said, no, it doesn't work that way. He says, you can't give the same sermon again because you're not the same person. And that's true. You go back to the same sources, but you give different sermons out of them. And I was thinking about that because starting next week, I'm going to begin writing a Torah column for the Jerusalem Post. And I have, God knows how much material over the years of stuff that I have taught. And I will certainly use it. Don't think I will pillage myself relentlessly, and others, of course, as I always do. And yet it will never come out the same, because Isaac, when he dug the wells of his father Abraham, they weren't the same wells. They were the same, but slightly different. And the tradition that he hands on is the same, but slightly different. And everything gets changed in the wearing and the handing on. But that is a good thing, not a bad thing. That's how, especially an interpretive tradition, lives and grows. In that sense, all the exegesis that we do, that is the reading in and understanding of the Torah, is this Isaac enterprise, is this understanding that a document can't stay the same in the life of those who read it, because life doesn't stay the same, and new conditions will always offer new possibilities of interpretation. So that's on Isaac. Please feel free to put in the chat or on the YouTube, if there is one, if there are any questions to answer. While we're doing that, I want to also let you know. Yeah, it's like Heraclitus, Jim. You're exactly right. That Heraclitus said you can't step in the same stream twice, and this was one of two ancient Greek philosophies, Thales and Heraclitus, of stasis and of change, and they're both correct, right? There is stasis, obviously. There are things that endure, and then there is change. I mean, the stream is still water, but obviously the water is not the same. And this metaphor of water, as you know, and as Shelley indicates also, this metaphor of water is one that is used all the time by the rabbis to describe the Torah. One of the metaphors of the Torah is the tree, Eitz Chaim, but the other is a living tree, but the other is water, Mayim Chaim, living waters. And the water, for lots of reasons, not only because it's life-giving, but also because it is it moves, it's malleable, it's yet not malleable yet forceful. The old saw about how, you know, a steady stream can wear its way in a rock. All those things in some way fit the Jewish conception of Torah. Now, just a couple of words on Jacob and Esau, and then we will wrap it up. I actually received from a friend, from Mark Gerson, who writes a Torah column for CBN that you should absolutely check out, and has a podcast called The Rabbi's Husband, because he's married to a rabbi, Erica Gerson. And his podcast has some really wonderful speakers and teachers on it. He sent me an article because I had spoken about the twinship of Jacob and Esau in different ways, that speculates that they were actually not fraternal but identical twins, even though they looked different, because apparently the idea that Jacob was holding Esau's heel suggests that they were identical, that they were not in separate parts of the womb, containers of the womb. I'm thinking of, it's not an amniotic sac, maybe it is. And that there is a condition that depends on blood flow. I put the article here somewhere, I should have it, but I'll just give you the summary, that would make one redder and perhaps hairier and even of lower intelligence sometimes. And that fits the Jacob-Esau story, that in fact they were identical and not fraternal twins. I find it fascinating speculation, don't know if it's true or not, but it is a fascinating speculation and just adds some richness to the possibilities of understanding the Torah, and again, shows how different disciplines can contribute to the interpretive enterprise. But whether identical or fraternal, one of the things that is interesting in the contrast between Isaac and Jacob is, if you recall, Isaac went to Be'er Lahai Roi when he was meditating in the field. And Be'er Lahai Roi is where Hagar and Ishmael went when Hagar was visited by an angel. And one of the speculations of the commentators is that Isaac went there to find his brother. Because remember, Isaac lost his brother. He didn't drive his brother away. He lost his brother. You know, Ishmael was suddenly kicked out of the house. Well, Ishmael was Isaac's older brother. So maybe as the years went by, Isaac wanted to go and see Hagar and Ishmael and find out more about his past. The contrast, of course, between that and Jacob and Esau is very powerful, because Jacob also lost his brother, but he was responsible for losing his brother. His deception or his coercion, depending on how you want to read the text, because he makes a bargain with Esau, but it's a coerced bargain. You know, Esau is hungry and he says, here, I'll give you some food, just give me the birthright. But either way you read it, whether you think that Jacob made a fair deal or a foul deal, he is nonetheless responsible for the separation of the brothers that then becomes a source of unending interest when they are reunited later. So that is also part of the possibility of what it is that makes Isaac and Jacob's stories so different, is the way in which their brothers were lost. And Jennifer again wrote that PTSD, that's been speculated about Isaac, the Akedah and PTSD. It depends in part how old you think Isaac was. According to one account, he's 37, although it seems like in the text he's young. But we don't really know very much about Isaac's psychological makeup, although that is certainly possible that it was his, yes, placenta, thank you. That it was his, that's the word I was groping for unsuccessfully. The reality is that even without PTSD, Isaac is the child of an overwhelming personality. And it is not unusual to find that when especially I think with a same-sex dynamic, because the identification is so strong, with a powerful and overwhelming father, that a son sometimes becomes more retired and quiet and shy, because such people tend to take up all the air in the room. Not always, but often. And when they do, it becomes hard for the space to have space for the child to make their own way. So Isaac's timidity could be overdetermined. It could be from his experience. It could be from the personality of his father. That's why he attached so closely to his mother, apparently. All this is highly speculative and very interesting. But nonetheless, what we do know in terms of a lesson as opposed to a personality evaluation is that Isaac does teach us the importance of renewal, of beginning again, of starting over, of redigging wells. So much effort in human life is because we are unaware of the fact that others have made the same effort and done many of the same things. So one of the interesting things I remember in going back some time ago in the archives of Sinai Temple was to see the same debates and the same initiatives and the same ideas had been done 20, 30, 40, 50, 70 years before. But of course, most people didn't remember them. And so that was not available. Someone asked me, and I see for the citation of the article, I can find it on my old email and send it to you. So just send me an email to dwolpe@sinaitemple.org, and I will find that article and forward it to you about the medical speculation that they were identical twins. Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? Any other questions? From the High Holiday Machzor, marginalia, right. The secret is not beginning, but beginning again. Exactly so. That is the Hanukkah lesson. I think it's the Isaac lesson. I think it's a really important lesson for all of us. And when the pandemic is over, there will be a lot of beginning again. A lot of beginning again. You have to, right? And people will pick up some of the pieces, especially of businesses, but also of lives. And they'll have to start over again. And that is repeatedly a story that human beings have found to be important and essential in order to make a life. And maybe Isaac and Hanukkah together can serve as some inspiration for when we can go back out into the world and come out of our caves and see each other full-faced and begin again. So thank you. And again, if you have any questions that I haven't been able to answer or you didn't get to ask, you can always email me and I'll do my best. It's dwolpe@sinaitemple.org. Take care. Have a good week. Shabbat Shalom. Please join us tonight at 6 o'clock for Dahlia Lithwick, Scholar in Residence. And if you missed the previous two sessions, they are on YouTube, Sinai Temple, YouTube. And also join us on Shabbat morning when I will be speaking about Isaac again, but in sermon form. And remember that there is no class next week because next week is Thanksgiving. And gratitude, also a powerful Jewish theme. We start the day each day with Modeh Ani Lefanecha. I am grateful to you, O God. So this is a chance for us to express gratitude. And I hope you do it in a way that is safe for everyone, because the most important thing in this Thanksgiving is to make sure that everybody's around to celebrate it next year too. Take care.